Meet David Hinchcliffe, a private investigator with over 20 years of experience. David is well known for gathering information no one notices, analyzing data no one thought to look at, and figuring out complex cases that stumped his colleagues. A razor-sharp mind and an even sharper intuition, which has helped him solve the most challenging cases in his career. You see, David's psychic abilities have always been a part of his life, but he never advertised it to any of his clients. He believes that his job is to use his skills to gather evidence and solve cases, not to showcase his psychic abilities. In fact, David is often able to solve cases without ever using his psychic powers. David's career as a private investigator began when he was in the military. He was serving as an intelligence officer when he discovered his psychic abilities. After leaving the military, David decided to put his skills to use as a private investigator. He quickly gained a reputation for being the best in the business. Over the years, David has solved countless cases, from missing person cases to complex fraud investigations. He's even been able to help the police solve some of their cold cases. Yet, despite his success, he remains humble and focused on his work. He never knows that his psychic abilities are a gift, and he uses them to help people in need. During the COVID lockdowns, he lost a lot of business, but still managed to have work. Currently, things have been back to almost full swing, but his next client was waiting in his office. His secretary greeted them and informed him of his visitor. He hung his coat on the rack and his fedora on the top. As ridiculous as it may seem, he took great comfort in his uniform. He modeled it after Sherlock Holmes, his childhood inspiration. He opened his office to see a desperate mother, lost behind her smile. "Hey, how are you doing today? What can I help you with?" A small pocket of tears hit the corner of her eyes, and she tried to keep it together. "It's my daughter. She's missing. I called the police the day it happened. They had a search team and everything. I tried to follow all of it. I did everything. Now they don't answer my calls and won't give me an answer. I tried to let them do their job, but it's my daughter. I can't just sit back and wait." She offered a picture with the name Elizabeth. David calmed the poor lady down and assured her he would do everything he could. She didn't know he meant all of his resources. He treated every case like a life or death situation. I guess it's old habits from the military. The key in most of the cases he solved. In this one, he started where the story left off. The mother said she had disappeared at a club, some place called The Hedge. It wasn't a simple Google search. He ended up finding mentions of it on Reddit, some of the channels he would check up on time to time. Most of its members are internet sleuths. Minor investigators themselves. The club was in a blue-collar side of town. The building was clean and unlit. The faint bass tones told him otherwise. He walked to the back with his flashlight drawn. He looked over every detail in the alleyway. Nothing was giving him any clues. He closed his eyes, assessing that special part of himself, and looked through his second sight. He saw the residual energies left behind in the alley. His powers gave him the sketch and the ink. He started filling in the details. Quickly, he was surrounded by people from different periods of time, coming to the same spot. Each one of them lifted their hand to the seventh layer of the brick. He followed their motion, pressing the loose brick, causing a metal clank to come from the trash bags nearby. When he lifted them up, he found the entrance to the hedge. The metal doors were heavy riveted slabs that took a decent amount of effort to lift. Descending the stairs, he heard the bass of the music intensify. His senses were telling him there were some shady energies in the room. It didn't take him long to determine who. Two men at the bar noticed his entrance and had begun tracking his movements since he came in. He noticed them too, and doing his best to seem like he didn't, makes his way to the bar. Standing next to them, he ordered a shot of whiskey. The bartender silently poured his drink and left to attend another. He touched the glass and saw the life and death of a man named Seymour. This was a regular occurrence to him by now, so he cataloged it and another set of things to remember for later. But something he would unfortunately never forget, never once showing this affected him on his face. Maintaining his disguise was paramount. He turned to lean back up against the bar, sipping his drink. From his peripherals, he saw two men gawking. He felt dark energy coming from them. Their very presence felt like a threat. When the song transitioned into the next, he gave the appearance that he liked the jam. Dancing in place, moving forward to the dance floor, He was awkward and started jiggling and did this weird thing with his hands, trying not to spill the drink in the other. And obviously the message was clear. The two men shifted their suspicious eyes to each other. They turned around and put their elbows on the bar. Friction from another dancing body glazed his. He got a sudden memory jolt. The girl who bumped him had been there the night before, and from her point of view, he saw a girl dancing in front of her. A man in a black leather jacket approached her, and they danced. The vision shuffled until, hours later, the man escorting her through the crowd. The vision faded. He turned around and made eye contact with the girl. Her face looked like she saw a ghost. She quickly turned and ran for the exit. The music was so loud and the atmosphere so intense. Most of the party's gores and the drug trance dancing off beat. No one noticed the drama taking place, besides the men at the bar eagerly looking to fight any stranger drunk enough to stumble to their shithole. David followed the girl. The two men followed David, passing through a small hall leading to the back door. The grim faces of two men illuminated in rolling stripes of strobing color. Grimly determined to let out their rage, David sensed this. When they were in the alley, the girl was nowhere to be seen. The men, on the other hand, letting the door drop, banging shut. David turned around slowly. "You looking for something, buddy?" He kept calm and just spoke. "Listen, fellas, I'm a detective. I'm just looking for answers." One of the men threw a sucker punch, and he ducked, and it clobbed the man behind him. The man at the end of the swing is now facing David. He caught an uppercut to the nuts, and knees to the face, and he reacted to the nut punch. The second man grabbed David from behind, repositioned his hips, and threw him easily over his back. Looking up at David, his last view was the bottom of his boot. David tucked the unconscious pair against the wall like two passed out drunks. At the end of the alley, he saw a girl peeking around the corner. "Hey, wait!" He took off down the alley and reached the end. Like before, with no signs of the girl. He slammed his fist against his head and cursed. Head down, he noticed something shining on the pavement. On a closer inspection, he noticed it was a sterling silver earring. As soon as he made hand contact with it, he saw the girl again, but this time from an aerial view. She was running down the alley one block up, turning left now. He kept his second sight open, chasing the girl down, but with an alternate route. Making a right, after a quick jog, he was face to face with the girl. Tears poured down her cheeks and she put her hands up, defensively crouching to the ground. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just trying to find answers. I'm a private investigator. I'm looking for this girl, Elizabeth. Have you seen this girl?" She took her hands away from her face, still shaking, looking to see the picture. "Yeah, I recognize her. She left the hedge last night with somebody. That's all I know." He could tell, even in her frazzled, shook-up state, she was lying. He reached out to pull her up. She was hesitant, but took it. The visions were like a torrent of information, blasting his mind into fragments. He had never seen so much residue. His word for what was left on the body after death. It was hard to tell if it was experience of people that she'd made contact with. The girl scrambled and ran. He didn't try to chase her. He was too busy trying to sort through the information just to bombard his brain. Every time he went through it, a vague, familiar face kept being shown. The more you try to make sense of it, the farther it escapes his mind. The image of a man in a leather jacket was clear now. He drew a rough sketch while it was fresh. Once on paper, he contacted his friend in the police department. Gloria was an information clerk, and she followed most of what went through the department. It was late, and the bakery was closed. But he knows another way to get her to talk. There's this ancient liquor store that he would often visit. The owner was an old friend and whom, from time to time, would often fill him in on events in the neighborhood. He made his introduction just like he always does, calling the man some absurd name. "Tickle Dicks, how you doing, old man?" The man smiled. "I'm doing good, you degenerate fuck. Come in, you've been such a stranger lately." They caught up on the last few weeks, and the man waited for David's reply. He took a second and worded properly, not giving too much away. "Oh, I'm just on another case, helping my client find her daughter. She's been missing for a couple of days, and the police don't know much about it." The man put his index and thumb on his chin like he was trying to remember something. "I know the case. Is the little girl Elizabeth?" David nodded his head. "Yeah, people have been talking all right. Probably nothing you're looking for. Word is the little hussy got mixed up with some bad people. Some wannabe goth kids dressed like vampires. I know the group they speak of. I always thought they were a bunch of nerds. The leader goes by the name of Mendoza. He comes in every now and then. Come to think of it, you and him could be related. Mendoza." He thought of logging the name out of his memory. They continued to conversate for a few more minutes, but David got almost everything he came for. Hey man, it was nice to see you, and I don't mean to cut the conversation short, but I'm on the job. Hey, you got any of that baklava your wife makes? He bagged his Pepsi and treats and went to meet Gloria. Honey, I seen you brought some delectables. This isn't a social visit, is it? He shook his head. I'm sorry, Gloria, but it's not. Not today. I'm working on a case and I just can't seem to get a foothold. Any way you can look into it and tell me a little something about it? He set his files and the baklava on the desk and smiled. She let him simmer in his anticipation before she answered him yes. A few minutes later, he had a manila envelope with a car number on it. He knew by her facial expression things were about to take a turn. Flipping through the documents, he found that Elizabeth escaped a cult. Some backwoods lunatics called the Order of the Moth. And supposedly, she had been doing this for 8 years. A memory came back to him. He remembered from the girl's perspective seeing the back of the leather jacket, a red skull above the white moth. Another piece of the puzzle has been placed. He also read of an abandoned building said to be the cult's local chapter. She immediately set out the road to the address. 20 minutes slow driving in traffic. It was exactly as they said. Abandoned. A dilapidated, decaying, ruined bottle factory. He found the back door kicked off its hinges, easily pushed open. Inside were leftovers of outdated, useless equipment, and evidence of life was present in any space he looked. Dead rules and empty aluminum cans of food, dead batteries and rotted rat remains. He saw a journal, or what could have been a diary, that had familiar insignia. He picked it up without opening it, and he was linked with its past. A young man, parentless, in the streets, watching life happen around him, spent years as a vagrant. One day after attempting an overdose, in his hospital bed, a man came to visit, laying hands on his head and said some weird words, and when he removed them, he could sense that the kid's mind was free from the former burden. He saw flashes of the years to follow, murder, rape, thievery, and sacrifice. The hunger pains he felt were now his own, as were the memories. The boy's life was hard. His death, on the other hand, he had no memories of the moment of death. He just ceased to exist at some point. David's powers don't give him play-by-play. Most of the time, it's like half-remembered movies. The plot points are clear, but the details are muddy. He saw a red light pierce the shadows of the wall to his left. He flipped the circuit breaker and the lights all flickered on. The first thing he noticed was the mural inscribed in blood, with its donor's death beneath it. I see you, David, written in a giant, bulging illustration of an eye. An overwhelming feeling of being watched. Not from someone in the room, nor surveillance. He felt the eye looking down at him and into him. The feeling of dread crept over his entire being. The shadows drank him when the lights went off. Blue sparks flew from the breaker next to him. The eye and the messages still blazed in crimson fluorescence. David fled the building, terrified and confused. How did they know my name and I'd be there? The idea of another psychic just didn't make sense. He's met psychics before and they never had to acknowledge each other. Their power spoke through them. He felt intrusive energies unlike anything he sensed before. He thought of what he knew about Elizabeth and consulted with the information from her mother. Once he calmed down in his town car flipping through the notes, he found her email address and socials. He logged into her Facebook and her last post was 3 days ago. He skimmed her past posts for almost an hour before something stood out. Behind her, in one of the photos, was a wooden backyard clubhouse. His power told him this was significant. He screenshotted the image, and with metadata, he found out where it was taken. Not too far from where he was parked, less than a 10-minute drive. The night was weighing on him heavily and becoming a burden. In all his investigating career, he has never had this feeling. A drink was necessary, and a bar coming up was his solution. Inside, he swirled the drink around in his glass, contemplating its intake. On the bar, carved in the wood right in front of him, was a moth. He dropped his glass and every patron gave him their full attention. Wordless, and this pale-faced expression and excited silently and embarrassed. In his car, his mind was exploding with possibilities. There's no time to waste. Looks like I might get this done. I might have to act now. It was a lot for him. His stress levels exceeded his normal threshold. He put his fingers to his pulse and took a deep breath, put in the car in gear and turned on his lights and pulled out headed to the clubhouse. He pulled up to an ugly mansion, falling apart everywhere he looked with cigarette-stained blinds and dusty porch. Besides a small rectangle spot untouched by falling dust, He went around to the back and his partial memory of the place sharpened. He had a strange sense of knowledge of the property. He knew where the clubhouse was, so he pushed forward down a path into the woods. In a clearing a few yards ahead was the remnants of a garden with wooden structures. This he recognized immediately as the clubhouse. On the door was a skull and moth. His heart sank and he heard voices begin to whisper all around him. The whispers grew louder until he sounded like he was surrounded by people screaming at him. He put his hands over his ears and tried to think happy thoughts. None came, yet the voices died down until only unintelligible whispers came from the wooden clubhouse, as if inside there was a light source. Orangish-yellow beams escaped from the cracks between the boards. Every fiber of his being told him to turn around and call the case closed. Just tell the lady she couldn't be found. His moral compass was pointing him towards the shack. One shaky hand went for the handle. When he touched it, he felt electrocuted with hostile energy. The contact with the metal handle was unbreakable. He tried to peel his hand loose, but it was unrelenting. He fell back and the door opened. Inside the small structure was a warehouse-sized space. Without thinking or allowing his body hesitation, he plunged through, tumbling to his knees. He was inside a cycloptic temple with stone spiraling columns, with rubies spaced a hand-length away from each other up its sides. Between two of the pillars were an altar. Upon it was a young lady with a bloody dagger. He ran to her side, checking her pulse. Her cold, lifeless hand shot up and snatched his. Her eyes were white into an abyss window, into a universe unknown to man. This was Elizabeth. It was her body, but the voice that spoke was demonic. "I see you, child. We've been waiting for you." Cloaked figures stepped from the darkness. David drew his gun. Deep bellowing laughs filled the chamber. "Your mortal weapons do no harm to me. Kill my followers if you please. It will accomplish nothing. You belong to me now." He panicked and shot 3 cloaked targets, followed by 2 shots that were missed before they were on him. Tearing his gun and clothes off, dragging him screaming to the altar. When he knew death was waiting for him on the stone platform, something happened. Something he's never done before until now. His physical voice couldn't produce another scream, but in his mind he roared with murderous anger. The hooded members around him fell clutching their heads in pain. When they let go of him, he hit the floor running. He saw the door leading to the real world slowly closing. He felt his heart sinking. He doubled his efforts. He slipped and caught himself mid-fall and continued to sprint for his life. The door was centimeters away from closing completely. He slammed his shoulders into it, falling on his ribs, probably cracking a few. The cold white form that was Elizabeth fell to her back in the distance, morphing into a grotesque display of broken bones and twisted muscles. Her voice and the demon's voice combined into a chorus as she was spider crawling towards him. He ran for it, her elongated limbs stretching out of the portal, gripping the edges of the clubhouse's threshold. With one big yank, she pulled herself through, ripping slabs of skin off onto the wood. What came out of the other side could barely be called human. The demonic homunculus bolted in his direction, limb after limb smacking into the pavement. 2 steps, 6 steps, then it was galloping and closing the distance. Back on the street, the creature was hot on his heels. He turned down the alley, pulling a dumpster into his path. It exploded into pieces of metal. Trash was flying everywhere. The creature flowed through it like it was nothing there. David came out of the alley into a busy crosslight. He turned around and gasped. The shadow that preceded the beast was a tower of muscle flailing with tentacles, shifting in and out of shape. The thing that came into the light had different unpleasant shapes. Time felt stagnant. Seconds felt like minutes. David banked on the side of the house and ran for dear life out of the alley. Now on the streets, the commotion stirred up the neighbors. Porch lights came on, and those who didn't come outside watched from the blinds. A few saw what was chasing the man. Some panicked and locked their doors. Others retrieved weapons and started shooting at the creature. Bullets twacked into the body and first had no effect until some better armed neighbors came out to join the fun. Automatic rifle fires and flares did what the other calibers couldn't. Some rounds hit with such accuracy that it acted like a saw blade, severing limbs and puncturing fatal holes into it. Howls and screeches from multiple different voices screamed out in pain. David back on his feet, focusing as hard as he could, putting psychic weight on the monster, forcing it to the ground in bursts. It inches away towards him. He stayed focused, drew his gun and unloaded into the creature. As all were emptying their clips into its body, black blotches eventually consumed it and dissolved it. A black bloody paste oozed across the concrete, spreading in wide pool and bubbles and popping and letting out one last laugh. Sirens were heard rising in the distance. David stumbled away from the scene, searching his pockets for his cell phone. I must have dropped it back there. Fuck it. The phone's dead to me. He walked a few blocks before he found a business open. Inside, he located a phone and attempted to call Elizabeth's number. 3 rings and click. Okay, well, fuck, he thought. He checked the address the mother had given him, and he knew the street. On his walk, he tried to piece it all together. There was just too many gaps in the information available. In search for more answers, he finds the house. No light, no sound, no one home. He knocked and rang the doorbell before trying the knob. It was open. The door creaked and he entered the dark dwelling, calling out to find no one home. He searched the bottom floor, nothing. The first door at the top of the stairs was Elizabeth's room. It was plain and white with random pop stars decorated on the wall. A mirror with pictures taped to it drew his attention. Most were random and mundane. Behind the cluster, he found some type of significance. A group of friends, including her and a man in a leather jacket. He flipped the picture over and read the names in chronological order. Stephanie, Malcolm, Elizabeth, and Jacob. Jacob? Okay, now I got a name. In the photo, he recognized the restaurant in the background, one he had visited in a previous case. A window broke. It came from down the hall. He focused on the sound's direction and advanced slowly down the hallway. He drew his gun and pulled the action back. Empty fuck. Holding his gun as a throwable just in case, a feeling hit him that his powers often lent him. The feeling of death. Or more accurate, the lack of life where it should be. Tension was getting to his nerves. He took a deep breath and bursted into the room, only to find the emptied out cavity of the mother. All of her organs have been dug out. What stuck out the most to his nerves and powers is the fact that she's been dead and decaying for days. He didn't want to think about the implications of this knowledge. He was forced to consider what talked to him in the office. He noticed a blood trail that led to the windowsill and down the side of the house. He had a sick feeling this wasn't over. He knew Elizabeth was a lost cause, but he couldn't end this without knowing more. He knew the unanswered questions would rot away in his mind for the rest of his life. The only choice was to pursue this to whatever end may be waiting for him. He reached out with a psychic energy and didn't feel any other presence. He calmed himself down and called the ambulance anonymously. The ambulance was pulling around the corner by the time he was at the end of the street. He let the lights fall out into the distance and he pressed on the gas. The restaurant was closed. Only parking lot lights were visible from the end of the road. He pulled it to the darkest corner, shut his lights off, and waited. The sound of the city nightlife were the closest thing to relaxation David felt in hours. It wasn't long before his patient stakeout turned into a front row seat to obscene. A manhole cover lifted and moved to the side, allowing 3 robed figures to crawl from the gap. With the grace of a marionette doll, an emaciated corpse rose weightless from the depths. It stopped levitating several feet from the hole and glided towards the shadows opposite of his car. The 3 hooded figures melted in their robes, just a pile of smoking clothes, all that was left. The dark red slime that oozed out of the robes rolled towards the shadow. David sat frozen in his car, watching in disbelief as the dark figure began to form in the parking lot before him. The shape slowly turned into a twisted, blasphemous shape, its red eyes fixed on him with an intense glaze. David's heart begins to race as he's struggling to comprehend the surreal scene unfolding before him. Sweat beaded off his forehead as he considered his options, but fear rooted him into a seat. He could only watch in his horror as the demon took the final form, stepping forth from the shadow, filling in the air with the smell of rotten meat. David is in a frightful state, thought invisible thoughts. The beast wasn't interested in David at the moment. Either way, he knew things were going to get dicey by the end of the case. It lifted 10 feet in the air and exploded into a swarm of black flies. It swarmed into the twilight wind and headed south. David cranked the ignition and followed the cloud of buzzing insects to the desolate block into the ghetto. No house was livable on either side. All had either been burnt or boarded up, the combination of two. The flies burst through the windows of a house at the end of the block and flooded into it. He parked in front of the house and shut his lights off. Shortly after, in a shuffling pace, the leather jacket man walked past his car to the house. The red skull and the white moth radiated under the streetlight. Everyone he passed under blew out in a fountain of sparks. He felt a psychic ripple around the man's aura. He got out of his car and yelled to the man. He stopped mid-stride. David could see the goose flesh on the back of his neck. The man slowly turned with an expression of disbelief on his face. The same was written on David's feature, staring at a mirror image of himself. The twin in the leather jacket said, "No, no, no," whipping his head back around at the house. It collapsed in on itself and first and sunk deeper until it fell into a hellish cavity forming in front of their eyes. Hands are coming out of the ground, shouting from the hole, pulling themselves into David's world. By the score, undead and demons of various disgusting forms spilled out onto the street. The man in the leather jacket looked at David. In a few seconds, he knew all I needed to do. In a psychic connection, David was shown his mother, whom he didn't have many memories of. She held him against her chest. Another cry turned his head. A brother, a twin brother. Time sped up and he was watching his parents argue, his mother holding the hand of the other son, walking out of their lives forever. He saw them descend into the order of the moth. Bits of humanity stripped away in layers. She offered his brother Samuel up to the demon in exchange for freedom, which to her great demise was death. The demon had no plan to release her. It focused the rest of its effort towards Samuel, trying to pervert everything he knew. His shared psychic connection broke and they were both in tears. Samuel turned around and faced the horde. David felt weighted down, stuck in a place while Samuel moved forward towards death. A blue-glowing bubble grew around Samuel. As he advanced, the bubble grew denser and doubled in size in seconds. Undead flesh that made contact with it evaporated. He pressed on screaming. David could barely focus on his brother. Gale force wind spilled out of his twin brother's body. Once in the center of the horde, he let his energy free, exploding into a dome of white light that consumed all vision. As colors started to return, puddles of ectoplasma and demonic blood stained every inch of his surrounding. His brother was gone, smoking strips of leather where he once stood. "No!" he screamed, forcing himself up to his feet. Staggering towards the house, the entity from the parking lot with a new husk over its bony frame rose from the pit. It panned its head from left to right in disgust. More than a dozen of its cultists and scores of undead flesh strewn across the street. It locked eyes with David. Spreading its black moth wings, he charged forward, screaming to the monster. It reached down, snatched him off the ground, bringing him to eye level. Before it could speak, David reached his hands out, clutching the demon's head. He let everything in him out. Blood began to drip from his eyes and nose. He began to grin, showing the white of his teeth. His eyes went bloodshot and red all the way through. He screams when he's joined with the beast. The monster opens its eyes in shock and surprise. His head is deflated like a punctured water balloon, spilling blood down its neck and torso. David and the moth fall into the pit, the glowing lights receding back to the hellscape. Below, filling the hole behind it with rubble. The case ended up closed after all.